The first speaker I want to introduce you tonight is Tom Miley. Tom was originally a financial advisor, but he knew he had found his calling on his very first day as a professional software developer. Tom is currently a software architect at Computol in Toledo, Ohio. And tonight, Tom will be telling us about switching a project from .NET to Meteor in about 30 days. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Tom Miley.
Thank you, Nick. I'm Tom Miley, and I help businesses increase their productivity with custom web applications. I work for Computol out of Toledo, Ohio. We're currently at about 12 engineers. We have 7 network engineers and 5 software engineers. I'm the manager of the software engineering department, and we specialize in enterprise line of business applications. Today I'm here to tell you how and why we decided that Meteor was a good fit for our company. What is a line of business application? If you asked an insurance salesman, what line of business are you in, they would most likely say insurance. If you asked a doctor, what line of business are you in, they would say medical or healthcare maybe. In software, if we're building line of business software, we're talking about software that helps these business people with their day-to-day business, whether that be insurance, healthcare, or any other business profession. Oftentimes, these applications are internal applications. The public will never see them or even hear about them, but they help these businesses run day-to-day. These apps can still be very complex, and oftentimes they're only used by maybe 1 to 10 people inside of a corporation. If it's a big corporation, it could be used by maybe in the thousands, but that's pretty rare. Most of the time, these are very small apps as far as users. So they have different needs than apps built for the masses. There are rarely cases where you're going to go above thousands of users on this. Why is this important? This is important because this is what most software developers are building. They're not glamorous, and most software developers aren't working on the next Facebook or the next Twitter. Let's look at some examples. The first example is John. He's the insurance salesperson I was talking about. He prides himself in knowing his customers well. He's got about 200 customers that he's responsible for dealing with. He needs to keep track of the names of his customers, who they work for, any kind of contact he has with them. He might want to keep track of their spouse's name, their kids, maybe even their dog's name. Whatever that person's interested in, he might only talk to them for 5 minutes a year, and it's impossible for him to remember the details of all those customers. So this is commonly known as a CRM type application or a customer relationship management application. And it's a very common example of a line of business application. Let's look at another example. Jane is a manager of a warehouse. Her warehouse is about 200,000 square feet. They move about 2 million pallets in and out of that warehouse every year. And if you can imagine, it would be very difficult to keep track of all those pallets without software. And maybe 50 years ago, they had to do that on pen and paper, and that would probably be awful. I'm glad we don't live in that world anymore. So she might be responsible for keeping track of an ID for every pallet, the date the pallet was received into the warehouse, who unloaded the pallet, where they put the pallet, how many boxes are in a case, how many cases or how many pieces are in a box, all sorts of data that she's responsible for keeping track of. In a line of business application, this is commonly referred to as a warehouse management system. And you might be asking, why would these people even need custom software for these? Aren't there hundreds, if not thousands, of products off the shelf that do these exact same things? And yes, there is. But with off-the-shelf software, usually you're getting around 80% of what you're looking for, because every business is unique, and you might have 2 businesses in the exact same industry, and they do things completely different. So product manufacturer tries to make a piece of software that's good for every business, but they're never going to get there. It's always going to be approximately about 80% there. To get the other 20%, that's where custom software comes in. And a lot of businesses will be okay with just getting 80% in the ability to get the software now, and they might save money or they might not. But for the businesses that are willing to pay for that extra 20%, custom software is an excellent option. And that extra 20% might amount to millions of dollars in savings a year. So custom software is looking really good when you can save that kind of money. And that's where Computol comes in, because we develop those line of business applications. We typically develop around 10 to 20 new applications a year. And this is kind of the breakdown of the last 3 years of the types of applications we're developing. As you can see, over two-thirds of them are web applications, because that's just kind of the trend our industry has been going in over the last 10, 15 years. We do about 17% of command line or small utility applications in the enterprise. That's just common. They're small tasks that need to be run usually on a cron job or a Windows task scheduler. They do a small task, they get run. But the interesting part is mobile applications. In enterprise, mobile applications is more of a want, or more of a want than a need. And this number is increasing every year in the enterprise, but it's still not as popular as web apps. So we need a way to deliver these web app or mobile apps, but it's not nearly as important as web apps right now. When a business does have a real need for a mobile app, we need some way to deliver that without spending a lot of resources learning native languages like iOS or Java for Android. Desktop apps are decreasing every year. Most of the time, even the desktop apps we do now are a thin wrapper on maybe a utility app, just because the customer needs some kind of graphical user interface. They don't want to mess around with a command line application. But in general, we're doing very little desktop applications nowadays. While we're trying to develop these line of business applications, we often run into the project management triangle or the iron triangle, and it's a common belief that you can only have 2 out of the 3 of these things. You can either have a cheap app that is high quality, but it's going to take a very long time to develop. You can have a quality app in a short amount of time, but it's going to cost you a fortune. Or you can have a app quickly developed at low cost, but the quality is really going to suffer. And that's really at odds between what the customer would pick out of those two and what the developer would pick. Generally, the developer is not going to want to give up quality, because some developer in the long run is going to have to maintain this application. And a lot of times that's going to be you. So if you're giving up quality, that means you might be skipping automated testing, you might be skipping documentation, you might not be refactoring your code to make it better. There's a lot of problems with reducing quality, but getting quality across to the customer is oftentimes difficult. They don't really understand what that even means, and they just assume you're going to make the software perfect the first time and not ever need to touch it again. But that's not what actually happens. So we accrue a lot of technical debt because of that. Over time, there's been a lot of new technology that's come out, and in the interest of solving the iron triangle dilemma, we need to keep evaluating new technologies to solve new problems. And over the years, Computol originally started with Cold Fusion in 2000 doing web development. That was before I was there, and at that time, I still believed JavaScript and it had something to do with Java. Shortly after that, in about 2004, we looked at Microsoft had technology .NET that was geared more towards enterprise application development, which made a lot of sense since that was the applications we were building. So we moved to .NET in 2004 for web applications, and that was with a technology of Microsoft called Web Forms. Web Forms was originally developed to appeal to desktop developers and was based around a model that felt like you were developing for the desktop. And in 2004, that made sense because there were a lot of desktop developers. But fast forward, and Ruby on Rails came out shortly after that and was geared more towards web developers, and it had really caught on, and Microsoft took note of that, and in 2000, they created it sooner than 2010, but they created a competing technology called ASP.NET MVC. And in 2010, we evaluated Ruby on Rails, moving to Ruby on Rails or moving to ASP.NET MVC. Because we already had those existing C# skills, we decided that ASP.NET MVC was a good move for us, and that's been great right up until about now. So why change now? As team lead, it's my job to evaluate new technologies and see where we can improve. And one of the main issues that we were looking to improve on is development speed, because in enterprise applications, the demand for new applications far exceeds our capacity to build them. We do very little marketing or advertising, and we have more work than we can do. If we could easily just hire more developers to do the work, we would do that. But one of the issues is finding experienced developers, and that brings us to onboarding. Oftentimes, because we can't find enough experienced developers, we have to hire fresh college graduates. And usually we end up spending about 100 hours trying to get them up to speed on .NET before they can start delivering value to our clients. And that's certainly something we'd like to improve on. And the next area is JavaScript skills. In the past, we'd always avoided JavaScript in favor of server-side technologies because JavaScript seemed more complicated and it lacked a lot of the widely adopted design and architecture patterns that prevented us from creating giant balls of mud in our code. So it was just easier for us to build everything server-side and use as little JavaScript as possible. That's not really the case anymore, where we can just avoid it and everything will be okay, because JavaScript is quickly becoming the universal programming language, and most developers are finding themselves unable to avoid it anymore. As I talked about mobile applications in the enterprise, it's not as important, but it is becoming more and more important, and we still have to offer the ability to create mobile apps to our clients. So we were definitely looking for a better option for that. It is possible to create mobile apps using .NET, but it's really more of an afterthought, and Microsoft has never really put a giant effort into making a good mobile experience. Reactivity and user experience. Like most server-side web frameworks, it's really difficult to get a good user experience, or at least the user experience that people are used to now, with a server-side technology. So that means you're adding a bunch of JavaScript in order to get that user experience. And without the JavaScript, consumers are now getting more used to having the rich user experience, and they're noticing that even these enterprise apps that we're creating don't have the user experience, and they feel outdated. So we're delivering new apps, and the customer already views them as outdated. And as a developer, you take pride in your work, and if the customer already feels it's outdated, that's not a very good feeling. When we started the recent quest to find improvements on our programming process, we focused mostly on Node, and we'd looked at Node in the past, and being that it's JavaScript based and it can easily look pretty, the code is not very pleasant when you start nesting a bunch of callbacks. We generally try to avoid it. And even with the popularity growing, we still thought that there might be something better than that. And with looking at Node, that brought us to Meteor. I'd heard of Meteor before, but I never really considered it an option, as .NET developers were used to developing on Windows, and they didn't have Windows support. Well, this time when we looked, they did have Windows support, so it was definitely worth taking a look at. I followed the to-do application that's available on Meteor.com, and it took me about an hour to complete, and I was really surprised at how few lines of code I was able to create the basic to-do application. So after that, I was excited to try Meteor with a real-life application. We had an app that was about 25% complete already, which isn't the ideal situation to be switching frameworks, but I was confident that Meteor could be a really good option. It was worth taking the risk to try to see how far we could get in Meteor. Worst case scenario, we lose a few days and go back to .NET. 2 days later, after trying to convert our existing progress in Meteor, we had all existing .NET features implemented in Meteor, along with a few extra features. I was loving how much progress we were making on it. It feels great to accomplish so much in such little time. It's the small wins that Meteor keeps delivering that really keeps you going, makes you have fun developing. We weren't ready to declare Meteor the greatest thing since sliced bread at that point, but it did look like it had a lot of promise. The next step was to bring the rest of my team in on and then get some feedback to see what they thought about the possibility. When I told them I was looking at a framework that was 100% JavaScript, I was really concerned that they might start throwing things at me. But when I told them, no, this isn't the JavaScript you're used to, they were willing to give it a try. So they all started individually on the to-do app that you can find on the Meteor website as well, and they liked that. And then as a group, we decided to work on the Slack chat clone tutorial. And if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to Google it. It's a really good tutorial where you can build a clone of Slack. And it's actually a chance to build something that you might actually want to use in a client application or even a personal application. So it's a lot better than some of the tutorials that we're used to. The rest of the team enjoyed doing the Slack chat clone. So with them on board, it was time to actually get everyone working on a client project and seeing how far we could go. We divided the task in Trello, and with the combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills, we had everything we needed to get started with Meteor. None of us were JavaScript experts, but you really don't need to be a JavaScript expert in order to get started with Meteor, and that was one thing that really appealed to us. And even with learning a new framework simultaneously with developing this application, we were able to accomplish more in 1 week than we'd accomplished in the previous month with .NET. After 2 weeks of implementing features, we had made so much progress that we didn't want to revert back to .NET. We would have had to go back and re-implement all those features, and that wasn't something we really wanted to do. The evaluation period of Meteor was over, and the pros far outweighed the cons of Meteor, and we were hooked and determined to complete this application in Meteor. This app has now been released into production, and the next few projects we plan on building are also going to be in Meteor. Here's what we actually built. This is a combination of a CRM, so it has a sales component. It's also an inventory management app, and then it has a quoting component. This customer sells used factory machinery. Oftentimes, a factory will upgrade their equipment, but the previous piece of equipment is still useful, or a factory might go out of business and they need to sell their used equipment. So our customer will buy that equipment and then resell it. They need the ability to track customers' equipment and send quotes of equipment to customers, and Computol was able to deliver on all of their requirements using Meteor. And this is one advantage to custom software is this could easily have been 3 separate apps. You could have one app that's a CRM, you could have one app that's an inventory management, and you might have one app that's a quoting app. And then that brings challenges of integrating the 3. Here with custom software, we can easily build one piece of software that does all of that and integrates really well. Using Meteor, we were able to accomplish faster development speed, probably about 40% improvement over the equivalent .NET app. The onboard time was incredibly easy because we already had JavaScript, HTML, and CSS skills, and that also brings us to JavaScript skills. Because Meteor is a lot easier than a lot of JavaScript frameworks to get started with, it actually allowed us the ability to ramp up our JavaScript skills. In the last 4 months, I've learned more JavaScript than I had in the previous 14 years. It makes it a lot easier to level up your JavaScript skills because it's not nearly as intimidating, and it extracts a lot of things that would normally make us avoid it. Mobile applications. We don't need to hire developers now that specialize in iOS or Android, and we don't need to spend hundreds of hours training them in these technologies because we can focus on what we know best, which is web development. And we can use those web development skills to build mobile applications with Meteor, and those are good enough for what an enterprise customer generally is going to use. These are basic create, read, update, delete, CRUD applications that don't need to be the performance that a native app's going to be, so it works really well in this situation. And then reactivity. Although reactivity might not be the most important feature in the enterprise, they might not be willing to pay extra for a good user experience or reactivity. Meteor offers this for free. So we're allowed to deliver better applications to our clients without them paying any extra for it. This is our new project management triangle using Meteor. We can now provide a higher quality product at less cost and faster than our previous development tools. Meteor has moved the bar for developer productivity, and the other technologies now need to catch up. Warning though, developing applications quickly is addicting, and it starts making your other technologies really feel like a grind. And if your tools aren't really fun to use, it might make you want to start looking for another job, or you might be inclined to create your own job. And create one's actually what I did. The stars have aligned, and my wife, who's a marketing consultant, she's actually in the crowd right now, and I decided to start our own web development and marketing company. Over the years, our products have crossed paths because web development and marketing fits really well together, and now was the time for us to give it a try. Computol has been a great company to work for, but they have an obligation to support their existing legacy .NET applications going forward, and Meteor provides the best benefit for new applications. So although they'll continue building new applications in Meteor, they still have to support their legacy applications. JumpIt, our new company, has a clean slate, and we're able to focus entirely on building new applications in Meteor. And that's really where my passion is. So with Meteor, we're able to easily compete with off-the-shelf products, and we can offer high-quality products that are exactly what the customer wants for around the same cost or even cheaper than what they could pay for an off-the-shelf products. And it becomes a really easy sell when you can provide exactly what the customer is looking for. And the market's big enough for everyone. Questions? New business is excellent. Like I said, we don't do really any marketing or advertising, and especially local businesses, they always have needs for line of business applications. And if you have any kind of relationship with them, we're fortunate enough to have the network engineering department. So between the business that they generate, they always have apps that they need, and that's more than enough to funnel our software engineering department. If anyone wants to contact me, you can reach me at Computol email address. There's Computol's website, or you can reach me at my email on JumpIt. If you have any questions about developing enterprise apps with Meteor, I'd be happy to help you out. Any problems that we encountered, there are some challenges with deploying from Windows and whatnot, and I can be happy to help with any of those questions. We're currently at the moment on DigitalOcean, but it's because this is our only production app right now, and buying the full Galaxy subscription doesn't make sense for us at the moment. However, with the new developer Galaxy plan, it's starting to look like a really good option, so we may look into migrating it. As far as integrating with existing data solutions, that is one of the challenges that we often come across in the enterprise because you have giant databases that are existing. And a lot of times, the best you can do is a REST API in order to talk to that data. And I'm sure we'll have better options in Meteor in the future where we have a data layer or some way to easily integrate with existing apps. Currently, the apps that we're choosing to do in Meteor, we usually have a good option or a lot of leeway on what database we're using. So Mongo is not a problem.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.